Hi there and welcome to my YouTube channel, Lex Sustineo. My name is Michael Torrance and I'm the one who set up this YouTube channel and the associated blog at lexsustineo.blogspot.com. Now the purpose of this very first blog video that I'm making is just to introduce myself, to introduce the topic, and hopefully to encourage you to come back and to see future postings that I intend to put up. Now, what is Lex Sustineo? Well, Lex Sustineo is a Latin phrase. Lex means law, and sustineo means to sustain or sustainability. And put together, basically it means the law of sustainability, or a law that endures. Now, what relevance does this have to me? Well, I'm a lawyer, and I'm currently practicing law in the city of Toronto in Canada, and I practice in the areas of employment and labor and human rights, and I represent companies and I provide advice to companies in these areas. And there's a new concept in the business community and increasingly in the legal community called sustainability. It's also referred to sometimes as corporate social responsibility. And it's an idea that fascinates me. It fascinates me as a lawyer because it appears to encompass broad and very important social obligations that traditionally have been considered something other than legal obligations. And I have found that the concept itself is not well understood. It's particularly not well understood amongst lawyers. Lawyers are used to giving advice based upon the statutes and regulations and policies that come out of legislatures. And but sustainability or corporate social responsibility obligations don't come out of legislatures. But yet businesses, it seems, are increasingly using these concepts to guide themselves and to regulate themselves in their operations all over the world. And so it's quite a fascinating area for somebody like me to start thinking about. Now, currently, while I'm still at Ogilvy Renault, I'm also pursuing a Master's of Law degree, and I've decided to focus in on the topic of corporate sustainability from the perspective of law. And what I want to really accomplish is to come away with an understanding in writing my thesis, and hopefully to advance legal thought in terms of what is corporate social responsibility as a social obligation. How do we understand it? How do we know what it entails? Now, the interesting thing to me about this concept of CSR is that it overlaps with areas of existing law. For example, labor relations, employment, human rights, and discrimination. All of these are already the subject of legislation. So my question is first of all, what is CSR? What does it entail? What are companies supposed to be doing that they aren't already doing? And how do we recognize and identify these obligations so that we can actually act upon them? And second of all, how do these obligations relate to law? Are they the same thing? Are they completely unrelated? And so these are all ideas that I want to develop in my blog and jointly also in this video blog. And I'd also like to use this video platform to give lectures, if you will, little discussions on various topics that I think will help to illuminate how the concept of CSR should be understood from a legal perspective and also from a business perspective. I think it's a very, very new area that is much in need of clarification, and I hope while I'm learning about these things to be able to collect my thoughts in a way that will be hopefully of some educational value for others. So before I sign off on this, I just want to discuss a blog that I just posted on January 5th that sets out some of my basic, let's call them hypotheses about the relationship between corporate social responsibility and law. I think law itself is a concept that is often fundamentally misunderstood by lawyers and by non-lawyers alike. And that I think this misunderstanding of law as being basically this monolithic system that comes from a legislature and commands us to act in certain ways is simply not accurate. But it's so ingrained in the minds of lawyers and non-lawyers that it's almost impossible for them to step out of that to understand how something like CSR could even come about. How could you possibly have obligations that aren't prescribed by a government? But frankly and factually, there have been for centuries obligations that are very reminiscent to law, if not identical to law, such as customary obligations, equitable obligations, that have coexisted with law and have done so without complications, in the same way that I think CSR and sustainability concepts will also begin to coexist with law. I think there's more in common between the two concepts than we may initially think. Law itself is a system of logic, for example. Now, in terms of the logical structure of law, my view is that it has three parts. The first part is that law imposes a conditional constraint on behavior. Now, what do I mean by conditional? Well, it's conditioned upon action. It's not a constraint upon your behavior in every circumstance, but the law will apply when we as actors in a social setting act in a certain way that brings the constraint of the law into play. For example, the laws that regulate highway traffic won't apply to us when we're sleeping in bed necessarily, unless we're sleeping in bed, I guess, in an RV and driving down the street. But aside from that scenario, it applies when we're in a vehicle. So it's conditioned upon that action occurring. And the law itself is nothing more than a logical constraint. The law as a concept, as an idea that we can understand and use to guide our behavior, can't actually control us. There may be consequences for not following the law, but the law itself is nothing more than a system of logic that constrains the way in which we carry out certain actions. So that's the first part, a conditional constraint. The second part is that law is used to evaluate social actors. And it's typically used to evaluate actors either in administrative contexts or by courts or even by police officers. Officers who have been empowered in some way to administer the law. And the final third aspect of law, or the structure of law, is that it gives rise to what I call conditional imperatives. So once an actor has been evaluated, if it's been determined that they've acted in a manner contrary to law, then there may be a conditional imperative or a consequence that arises from that fact, that finding. If they've complied with law, there may also be a positive consequence that flows from that. So those are the three aspects that I think define what law is. And ultimately, if we were to look at the objective of law, I would say that law provides us with justifying reasons for action. Now, those of you familiar with jurisprudence at all may say that that's reminiscent of the positivist theories of Joseph Raz. And indeed, it is. And part of my thesis is going to be to look at the theories of Joseph Raz and to try to modernize them, because I think they're a strong analytical foundation for understanding law, but I think that they are fundamentally not complete in a way that could help us to understand the new law or legal phenomenon that are occurring, which I think CSR is one of them. So that's the logical structure of law. Now, what